The war room fell silent as the final report came through. Another world had fallen to the Vorthak dominion. That made 17 civilized planets lost in just 2 months. Commander Hana stared at the holographic display floating above the metal table. Red zones spread across the galaxy map like drops of blood in water. "How many ships did we lose at Epsilon Prime?" she asked quietly. The Altarian officer named Kelthos answered with his usual precise tone. 47 vessels destroyed. 12 captured. 0 survivors recovered. Hana closed her eyes for a moment. Each ship carried thousands of lives, families, dreams, all gone because they could not find a way to stop the Vorthak advance. The orbital station around Kepler Prime housed the last free government in this sector. Representatives from 12 different alien species sat around the war room table. They had been fighting the Vorthak for 3 years now. 3 years of constant retreat and defeat. "Show me the tactical analysis again," Hana said. The hologram changed to show the last battle. Vorthak bioships moved in perfect formation. Their living metal hulls adapted to every weapon fired at them. Energy blasts that should have cut through armor barely left scratches. Missiles that worked in the first hour became useless by the second hour. "They learned too fast," muttered Dravik, the crystallite representative. His silicon-based body sparkled under the room's lights. "We calculate attack patterns, they adapt before we can use them." Elder Taman leaned forward in his chair. The ancient Voidwalker had lived for over 600 years. He had seen many wars, but nothing like this. The Vorthak hive mind processes information faster than our computers. They share knowledge, instantly across their entire fleet. What hurts one ship, all ships learn to resist. Hana nodded grimly. That was the problem they could not solve. The Vorthak were not just strong or numerous. They were perfect soldiers. No fear, no doubt, no individual thoughts to create mistakes. They fought as one massive organism with millions of bodies. "What about the new weapon designs from the hegemony?" asked General Voss, the Terran Coalition's military advisor. "Tested and defeated," Kelthos replied. "The Vorthak adapted to plasma disruption technology in 4.7 hours. Their bioarmor now absorbs that energy and grows stronger." The room fell quiet again. They had tried everything: new weapons, new tactics, new alliances. Nothing worked for long. The Vorthak learned from every engagement and came back stronger. "Perhaps we should consider evacuation protocols," suggested the Deltan ambassador. "Move our populations to the Outer Rim territories." "And go where?" Hana's voice carried frustration she rarely showed. "They will follow us. They always follow us. The Vorthak do not negotiate. They do not take prisoners. They consume worlds and move on." Elder Taman cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. When the oldest being in the room wanted to speak, everyone listened. "There is one option we have not discussed," he said slowly. "One species we have not contacted for military assistance." Dravik's crystalline body shifted colors, showing confusion. "All major military powers are already part of the coalition. The hegemony, the Trade Federation, the Rim Worlds Alliance. I am not speaking of major powers," Taman replied. "I am speaking of the humans." Silence filled the room. Then several voices spoke at once. "The humans? They barely have space travel. They only made first contact 50 years ago. Their technology is primitive compared to ours." Hana raised her hand for quiet. "Elder Taman, with respect, humanity has no significant military presence. Their entire space fleet consists of maybe 30 ships. Most are converted cargo vessels." "I am aware of their limitations," Taman said calmly. "But I have studied their military history. Their war records are unusual." Kelthos accessed his data files. "Human conflicts show high casualty rates and inefficient resource usage. Their tactics often defy logical military doctrine." "Exactly," Taman said. "They win battles they should lose. They survive situations that should kill them. Their strategies make no sense to us, but they work." General Voss leaned back in his chair. "I have read some human military reports. Their armies once defeated a much larger force by hiding inside a wooden horse. They won a naval battle by setting their own ships on fire and sailing them into the enemy fleet. Desperate measures, Dravik commented. Not proper military science. Desperate times, Taman replied. The Vorthak defeat us because they can predict our actions. They know how civilized military forces think and fight. But humans do not fight like civilized beings. Hana considered this. It was true that human tactics seemed random and chaotic. Their battle reports read like fiction rather than military documents. But they had won some impressive victories against larger enemies. Even if we contacted them, she said, what could they possibly do that we cannot? We have superior technology, better ships, more experience. Superior technology that fails against adaptive enemies, Taman pointed out. Better ships that become useless when the enemy learns their weaknesses. More experience fighting predictable wars. The debate continued for hours. Some argued that bringing humans into the conflict would only add to the casualties. Others pointed out that they had no other options left. The Vorthak advance continued while they talked. Finally, Hana called for a vote. The decision was close. 7 species voted to contact humanity. 5 voted against. It was barely enough to authorize the message. Very well, Hana said. We will send a request to Earth. But what do we tell them? How do we explain that we need their help when we have failed with everything we have? Elder Taman smiled slightly. We tell them the truth. We are desperate, we are losing, and we need someone who fights differently than we do. The message was composed carefully. It explained the situation without revealing how hopeless things truly were. It asked for military assistance against an enemy that threatened all civilized life in the galaxy. It promised that humanity would not fight alone. As the transmission beam shot across space toward Earth, Hana wondered if they had made the right choice. Bringing a primitive species into a war they could not win seemed cruel. But they had no alternatives left. 3 days later, the reply came from Earth. It was brief and direct, written in the simple style that humans seem to prefer. We received your message, we will help. Our ships will arrive in 2 weeks, signed President Kim of Earth. No demands for payment, no questions about odds of survival, no requests for better technology or support. Just a simple promise to help. Hana stared at the message for a long time. Either humanity was braver than she thought, or they had no idea what they were getting into. She suspected it might be both. The human fleet would arrive soon. Then they would see if desperation and different thinking were enough to change the course of a war that seemed already lost. Admiral Daiho stepped off the shuttle onto the Coalition staging platform with a confident stride. Behind him came 50,000 human soldiers, sailors, and pilots. They carried simple weapons and wore basic armor that looked primitive next to the advanced equipment of their alien allies. Commander Hana waited at the docking bay with her senior staff. She had expected the humans to arrive with impressive technology or secret weapons. Instead, she saw young men and women who looked barely old enough to fight. Their ships were small and patched with metal plates that did not match the original hull colors. Welcome to Kepler Station, Hana said, as she greeted the human admiral. We are grateful for your assistance. Daiho smiled and shook her hand firmly. We came as fast as we could. Where do you need us? The directness surprised her. No formal ceremonies, no requests for briefings about payment or supplies. Just a simple question about where to help. First, we should show you what we are fighting, Hana replied. She led the human officers to the main briefing room. Colonel Minji activated the holographic display. Images of Vorthak bioships filled the air above the table. The creatures looked like massive insects crossed with warships. Their hulls pulsed with organic life. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing mouths. These are our enemies, Minji explained. The Vorthak have conquered 17 worlds in the past year. They learn from every battle. Weapons that work once become useless the second time. Captain June leaned forward to study the images. How do they adapt so quickly? Hive mind technology, Minji answered. Every Vorthak soldier shares thoughts instantly with the entire army. When one learns something, they all learn it. Like a computer network? Asked Lieutenant Yuna. More than that, they think as one organism with millions of bodies. No individual thoughts, no personal decisions. Perfect unity. The human officers exchanged glances. Admiral Deho rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What tactics have you tried against them? Minji spent the next hour explaining coalition strategy, coordinated fleet movements, precision weapons targeting, electronic warfare, advanced battle formations developed over centuries of space combat. All logical approaches, Deho said when she finished. Very organized, very predictable. Something in his tone made Hana pay attention. You think our methods are wrong? Not wrong, Deho replied. Just neat, clean. The enemy knows what you will do because you fight the way military academies teach fighting. How else would we fight? Asked Kelthos, the Altarian strategist. Captain Sunho grinned. Messily. The first joint operation came 3 days later. The mining world Tertius VII had fallen to Vorthak forces 6 months ago. Coalition intelligence showed heavy enemy fortifications around the main mining complex. The plan was simple reconnaissance. Send scouts to observe enemy positions and report back. Captain Sunho volunteered his unit for the mission. Hana approved, expecting the humans to follow standard scouting procedures. They would stay hidden, take pictures, and return with information. That was not what happened. Sunho's team landed on Tertius VII at dawn. By noon, they had disappeared into the underground mining tunnels. Coalition Command lost contact with them completely. Hana began to worry that the humans had walked into a trap. Then strange reports started coming from Vorthak positions. Enemy biomechs were attacking each other. Entire squadrons turned on their own forces. Underground explosions shook the mining complex. Water began flooding the main Vorthak command center. What is happening down there? Hana demanded. The answer came when Sunho's voice crackled over the radio. Mission accomplished. We are ready for pickup. What did you do? Hana asked. We got you some presents, Sunho replied cheerfully. The shuttle that picked up the human scouts carried more than just soldiers. It also carried 3 captured Vorthak biomechs. The alien war machines had been taken apart and put back together, with human modifications. Lieutenant Yuna proudly showed off her work. She had used spare parts from broken mining equipment to reprogram the biomechs. Instead of receiving orders from the Vorthak hive mind, they now broadcast false signals that confused other enemy units. You hacked their communication system? Minji asked in disbelief. Sort of, Yuna said. More like we taught their machines to lie. The biomechs are telling the hive mind that friendly units are actually enemies, so they attack each other. Meanwhile, Sergeant Wubin explained how his demolition team had flooded the command center. They had not tried to destroy the Vorthak base. Instead, they used mining explosives to redirect underground rivers. The water did not kill the enemy, but it forced them to evacuate their most important positions. You turned their own planet against them, Elder Taman observed with something like admiration. The planet was already fighting them, Wubin replied. We just helped it win. The results were undeniable. For the first time in 3 years of war, Vorthak forces had retreated from a fortified position. They abandoned Tertius VII completely, leaving behind equipment and supplies in their haste to escape. The coalition leadership gathered for an emergency meeting. The alien commanders struggled to understand what they had witnessed. The humans ignored our reconnaissance plan, Kelthos pointed out. They were supposed to observe, not engage. They were supposed to stay hidden, Dravik added. Instead, they infiltrated deep behind enemy lines. They were supposed to gather intelligence, General Voss said. Instead, they stole enemy equipment and turned it against its creators. Admiral Daiho nodded calmly. That sounds right. But it makes no tactical sense, Minji protested. They took enormous risks for no strategic gain. No strategic gain? Hana looked at the updated star map. They liberated an entire world with a 12-person scouting team. By accident, Kelthos insisted. Their success was not planned. Captain June spoke up. Who says it was not planned? The alien officers stared at him. You plan to capture Vorthak biomechs with mining equipment? Minji asked. We plan to cause trouble, June replied. What kind of trouble depended on what we found when we got there. That is not a plan, Dravik objected. That is chaos. Controlled chaos, Yuna corrected. We knew we wanted to hurt the enemy somehow. We just stayed flexible about how to do it. Elder Taman leaned back in his chair. Flexibility. The one thing the Vorthak hive mind cannot predict. Word of Tertius. Cephian spread through both armies. Coalition forces began to believe that victory might be possible. Vorthak commanders struggled to analyze what had happened. Their tactical databases contained no information about human military doctrine because humans seemed to have no consistent doctrine at all. In the human quarters, soldiers prepared for their next mission. They cleaned their simple weapons and patched their basic armor. They looked like amateurs compared to the high-tech alien forces around them, but they had done something no one else had managed in 3 years of war. They had made the unstoppable enemy stop and retreat. They had proven that the Vorthak could be defeated. Admiral Deho met with his officers to plan their next operation. What target should we hit next, he asked. Captain Sunho studied the star maps. Wherever they least expect us. Where is that? Yuna wondered. Sergeant Wubin grinned. Everywhere. The war was about to change in ways no one could predict. Not even the humans themselves knew what they would do next. That was exactly what made them dangerous. The news of Tertius 7 traveled fast through the galaxy. On Vorthak command ships, the hive mind struggled to process what had happened. Their tactical computers ran millions of calculations trying to understand the human attack patterns. Every analysis came back with the same result. Impossible. How do you fight an enemy whose actions make no logical sense? The Vorthak had conquered dozens of civilizations by learning their military strategies and adapting faster than they could change. But humans seemed to have no consistent strategy at all. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening among coalition forces. Other alien commanders were asking to study human tactics. They wanted to understand how a primitive species had succeeded where advanced civilizations had failed. General Hoseok saw an opportunity. He established the Human War College on New Harmony, a world recently liberated from Vorthak control. The first classes began with 50 alien officers from 12 different species. Commander Nari stood before her first group of students in a simple classroom. The alien officers sat in neat rows, ready to take notes on advanced human military theory. They expected lectures about new weapons or secret strategies. Instead, Nari wrote 2 words on the board. Expect chaos. That is your first lesson, she said. Everything will go wrong. Your plan will fail. Your equipment will break. Your enemy will do something you did not expect. How do you win anyway? The Altarian strategist Veltar raised his hand. You create backup plans for every possible failure. Good start, Nari replied. But what if your backup plans fail too? You create backup plans for the backup plans, Veltar answered confidently. And when those fail? More backup plans? Nari smiled. Exactly. Humans do not believe in perfect plans. We believe in having so many plans that something will work eventually. She opened a human military manual and showed them a typical operation outline. The aliens stared in confusion. The document contained 17 different ways to complete the same mission. Some plans contradicted others completely. This makes no sense, muttered the crystallite observer Zeph. Plan 7 says to attack from the north. Plan 12 says to attack from the south. Plan 15 says not to attack at all. Which plan do you follow? Nari asked. The best one? Zeph guessed. Whichever one works when you get there, Nari corrected. You start with Plan 1. When it fails, you switch to Plan 2. When that fails, you try Plan 3. You keep changing until something succeeds. The alien officers looked disturbed. Their military training emphasized careful planning and precise execution. The idea of constantly changing strategies seemed like madness. Captain Hyon taught the next class on human logistics. He showed them how to build a communication array using parts from a broken food processor. The aliens watched in amazement as he created a working device from complete junk. "How did you know those parts would be compatible?" asked the Deltan engineer Kira. "I did not know," Jan admitted. "I just tried connecting things until something worked. But what if nothing had worked? Then I would have tried different things, or found different junk, or built something else entirely." This was completely alien thinking to the Coalition officers. Their technology required precise components and careful assembly. The idea of building equipment by trial and error seemed inefficient and dangerous. Major Tajin demonstrated human repair techniques by fixing a damaged shuttle engine, but instead of using proper replacement parts, he installed components from a mining drill, a water pump, and what he called creative welding. "Will this engine work?" asked General Voss. "Probably," Tajin replied as he started the repaired engine. It ran smoothly, though it made strange humming sounds. "It might work, better than the original. Sometimes broken things are improved by fixing them wrong." The alien officers were beginning to understand why human tactics seemed so chaotic. Humans did not follow rigid rules because they expected everything to break or fail. They prepared for disaster by being ready to improvise solutions. The real test came at Kronos Station. The massive Vorthak fortress had stood unconquered for 8 months. Its bio-barriers had adapted to resist every weapon the Coalition possessed. Previous attacks had only made the defenses stronger. Alliance commanders planned a major assault using their best ships and newest weapons. The attack would be costly, but they believed it was the only way to break through the fortress walls. The humans suggested a different approach. Lieutenant Colonel Bora studied the fortress specifications with her team. The bio-barriers were living organisms that grew stronger when attacked. They absorbed energy from weapons and used it to multiply and strengthen. "What if we do not attack the barriers?" she asked. "What if we feed them instead?" Her team modified nutrient dispensers from captured Vorthak supply ships. Instead of firing weapons at the bio-barriers, they sprayed them with concentrated growth nutrients. The barriers began growing rapidly, expanding far beyond their intended size. Within hours, the living walls had grown so large they could not support their own weight. The bio-barriers collapsed inward, crushing the fortress structures they were supposed to protect. While the Vorthak scrambled to understand what was happening, Sergeant Major Jiwan's demolition team went to work. But they did not plant explosives to destroy the fortress. Instead, they used gravitational charges to change its orbit. Kronos Station began falling toward the planet below. The Vorthak were forced to evacuate or be destroyed when their own fortress crashed. They abandoned the system completely, leaving behind months of supplies and equipment. The Coalition officers watched in stunned silence as the humans celebrated another impossible victory. They had defeated an impregnable fortress without firing a single shot at it. "How did you know the bio-barriers would collapse from overfeeding?" Kelthos asked. "We did not know," Bora replied, "but we knew that attacking them made them stronger, so we tried making them weaker by making them stronger." "That makes no sense," Kelthos protested. "It worked," Bora pointed out. Word of Kronos Station spread through the Coalition forces like wildfire. Alien commanders began applying human techniques to their own operations. They started carrying extra plans for every mission. They prepared backup equipment made from spare parts. They trained their soldiers to improvise when original plans failed. The Vorthak found themselves facing an enemy they could not predict or adapt to. Coalition forces no longer fought in neat formations with predictable tactics. They struck from unexpected directions using weapons cobbled together from random materials. They achieved objectives by methods that defied all military logic. Most disturbing of all, the chaos was spreading. Alien officers who studied human tactics began thinking like humans. They questioned rigid doctrines. They experimented with new approaches. They prepared for failure by planning to succeed anyway. The Vorthak hive mind had conquered the galaxy by learning from its enemies. But how do you learn from teachers who change their lessons every day? How do you adapt to opponents who adapt faster than you can process their changes? For the first time in their existence, the Vorthak began to doubt their inevitable victory. The perfect soldiers were discovering that perfection might not be enough against an enemy that embraced imperfection as a weapon. The Vorthak Dominion faced something they had never encountered before: uncertainty. Their hive mind processed battle reports from across the galaxy, searching for patterns in human behavior. Every analysis reached the same conclusion: humans had no consistent patterns to analyze. Deep in Vorthak space, the Central Command struggled with this new reality. For centuries, they had conquered species by learning their military doctrines and adapting faster than their enemies could change. But humans seemed to change their entire approach with every battle. Meanwhile, Fleet Admiral Youngman coordinated humanity's largest operation yet, from his command ship above the liberated world of New Prosperity. The mission was ambitious: free the core worlds, the heart of Vorthak territory where billions of enslaved beings waited for rescue. But this would not be a traditional military campaign. The humans had discovered something important about their enemy. The Vorthak weakness was not tactical or technological. It was something deeper. "They cannot understand us," Admiral Youngman explained to his senior staff. "The hive mind thinks in perfect logic. It cannot process thoughts that do not follow rules." Captain Saiwan leaned forward at the briefing table. "So we fight them with chaos?" "We fight them with humanity," Youngman replied. "We show them what individual thinking looks like." The operation began with something no military academy would recognize as warfare. Captain Saiwan's Psychological Warfare Division did not attack Vorthak positions. Instead, they broadcast human music into enemy communication networks. The first transmission was a simple song by a human artist named Bach. The mathematical precision should have been easy for the Vorthak to process. But then came jazz music, with its wild improvisation. Then rock music with its emotional intensity. Then folk songs that told stories of individual struggle and hope. The effect on the Vorthak hive mind was immediate and disturbing. Their communication networks began experiencing processing errors. Units reported confusion and hesitation. Some bioships simply stopped moving, as if their pilots were trying to understand what they were hearing. "Music is working," Saiwan reported, "but I want to try something stronger." The next broadcast included human poetry, words that painted pictures with emotion rather than facts, stories that had no logical purpose except to make people feel something, art that existed only because humans enjoyed creating beautiful things. Vorthak drones across the core worlds began experiencing something they had never known: individual thoughts. For brief moments, single minds separated from the collective consciousness. They wondered about the meaning of the sounds they were hearing. They felt curiosity about beings who could create such strange beauty. Colonel Jinsu took a different approach with his Special Forces team. Instead of capturing Vorthak equipment, they improved it and sent it back. Enemy biomechs were returned with upgrades that made them more efficient but also more independent. The enhanced machines began making their own decisions, instead of waiting for orders from the hive mind. Some chose to continue fighting. Others chose to stop. A few chose to help the creatures they had been ordered to destroy. "We are giving them the gift of choice," Jinsu explained to puzzled coalition commanders. "The hive mind cannot control beings who think for themselves." The turning point came when Major Yunji attempted something unprecedented. Using captured biotechnology, her diplomatic team bypassed the Vorthak hive mind entirely. They spoke directly to individual drones, addressing the suppressed consciousness within each soldier. "We know you are in there," Yunji broadcast on frequencies only individual Vorthak could hear. "We know you have thoughts the collective does not allow. We know you wonder about things beyond war and conquest." The response was explosive. Across the core worlds, Vorthak drones began experiencing full individual awareness for the first time in their lives. They remembered being born as separate beings before the hive mind absorbed their personalities. They wondered what they might have become if they had been allowed to grow as individuals. Some drones tried to return to the collective consciousness, frightened by the intensity of independent thought. But others embraced their newfound individuality. They began questioning orders. They started making personal choices. They discovered emotions like curiosity, wonder, and hope. The Vorthak command structure began falling apart. Fleets that had moved in perfect coordination suddenly contained ships going in different directions. Orders from the central command were ignored or interpreted differently by individual captains. Some units surrendered without fighting. Others requested asylum with coalition forces. The hive mind desperately tried to restore control. It sent enforcement ships to destroy the rebels. But the enforcers were also affected by human broadcasts. They too began thinking as individuals. The rebellion spread faster than it could be contained. Admiral Youngman watched the chaos spread through enemy territories. "We did not defeat them with superior weapons," he observed. "We defeated them with ideas." The final battle for the core worlds was unlike any conflict in galactic history. Human forces arrived expecting to fight massive battles against organized resistance. Instead, they found Vorthak ships flying white flags of surrender. Entire planets had been liberated by their own former occupiers. Commander Hana landed on the capital world of the core system to find something amazing. Former Vorthak drones were working alongside the beings they had once enslaved. They were sharing food, building shelters, and caring for wounded civilians together. A Vorthak drone approached her with hesitant steps. It had removed its bioarmor and stood wearing simple clothes like a civilian. When it spoke, its voice carried individual personality instead of the flat tones of the collective. "Thank you," the former drone said. "You gave us back ourselves." "What will you do now?" Hana asked. "Learn," the being replied. "We want to understand what it means to be individual. We want to create art like humans do. We want to explore ideas that have no military purpose. We want to live instead of just exist." Similar scenes played out across the liberated worlds. Former enemies were becoming allies, united by their shared discovery of individual consciousness. The rigid hierarchy that had made the Vorthak unstoppable was transforming into something completely different. But the most profound change was happening among the coalition forces themselves. Alien species that had fought the war with traditional tactics were learning to think creatively. They were questioning old assumptions and exploring new possibilities. The galaxy was changing, not through conquest or destruction, but through the radical human idea that every being had the right to think and choose for themselves. The weapon that defeated the Vorthak was not technology or strategy, but the simple concept of individual freedom. Fleet Admiral Youngman stood on the observation deck of his ship, looking out at the stars. The war was ending, but something much more important was beginning. A new age where beings across the galaxy would learn to embrace the chaos and beauty of individual thought. The universe would never be the same. 2 years had passed since the desperate message that brought humanity into the galactic war. The universe looked completely different now. Where once there had been rigid battle lines between the Vorthak Dominion and the Coalition, now there were construction sites and art galleries. Admiral Hana stood on the observation deck of the new Galactic Reconstruction Council headquarters, built in orbit around the former Vorthak capital world. Below her, the planet bustled with activity that would have been impossible to imagine just a few years ago. Former enemies worked side by side, building cities that had never existed in any species' architectural plans. President Kim of Earth had arrived for the second anniversary celebration. He found Hana watching the controlled chaos of reconstruction with a satisfied smile. "Hard to believe this is the same place that almost conquered the galaxy," Kim observed, joining her at the viewing window. "The place is the same," Hana replied. "The people are completely different." She was right. The beings working on the planet below included former Vorthak drones who now called themselves by individual names. They had learned to paint pictures, write stories, and compose music. Their art was strange and wonderful, influenced by centuries of collective thinking but expressing newly discovered personal emotions. "How many worlds have been rebuilt now?" Kim asked. 47 major population centers," Hana answered. "But we are not just rebuilding. We are building things that never existed before." That was the amazing part. The reconstruction was not about returning to how things were before the war. It was about creating something entirely new. Worlds that combined the best ideas from dozens of different species, including the transformed Vorthak. Commander Minji approached them with a report tablet. She now headed the new Galactic Defense Academy, where the strangest classes in the universe were taught daily. "The graduation ceremony is ready," Minji announced. "We have officers from 83 different species completing their training today." The academy had evolved far beyond the simple human war college that started on New Harmony. Now it was a place where beings from across the galaxy learned not just human tactics but human philosophy. They studied creativity alongside strategy. They practiced improvisation with the same dedication they once gave to memorizing regulations. The graduation ceremony took place in the academy's main hall. Hundreds of beings from species that had never worked together before stood in neat rows, but their uniforms were anything but neat. Each officer had modified their standard gear with personal touches and practical improvements, learned through human-style training. Fleet Admiral Youngman gave the keynote address. His words were translated into dozens of languages, but the message was the same for everyone. "You are not graduating as better soldiers," he told them. "You are graduating as better thinkers. You have learned that every problem can be solved if you are willing to think differently enough." In the audience, former enemies sat together sharing stories and laughing. Altarian strategists compared notes with ex-Vorthak tactical specialists. Crystallite engineers collaborated with human inventors on projects that defied the laws of several different sciences. Captain Xianwu ran the Integration Corps, the most unusual military unit in galactic history. Their mission was to help former Vorthak individuals discover who they wanted to become, now that they could choose for themselves. The results were remarkable. Some former drones became artists, creating sculptures that moved and changed shape. Others became teachers, sharing their unique perspective on collective versus individual thinking. Many became engineers, using their biological technology knowledge to develop new types of equipment that grew and adapted to their users' needs. "The hardest part is not teaching them new skills," Xianwu explained to visiting dignitaries. "The hardest part is convincing them they are allowed to fail. The hive mind never made mistakes, so they are terrified of making their first one." But they were learning. Former Vorthak individuals were discovering the joy of trying something new, failing completely, and trying again differently. They were experiencing the very human concept of learning through mistakes. The memorial station orbiting the first liberated world had become something unexpected, a celebration center. Instead of just remembering the war, it hosted festivals where beings from across the galaxy shared their cultures, their foods, their music, and their dreams. Elder Taman, now over 600 years old, spent his time at the memorial station, collecting stories. He was writing the definitive history of the war, but it was unlike any military history ever written. It focused not on battles and casualties, but on moments when enemies became friends and impossible things became routine. "What was the most important battle of the war?" a young journalist asked him during an interview. Taman smiled with the wisdom of centuries. "There was no most important battle. The war was won in a million small moments when beings chose to think differently than they had ever thought before." Greatest victory was not military but cultural. The galaxy had been transformed from a place of predictable order into a realm of infinite possibility. Species that had remained unchanged for millennia were now constantly evolving, learning from each other and creating new ways to live. Trade routes that once carried only goods now carried ideas. Diplomatic meetings that once focused on territory now discussed art and philosophy. Military alliances had become cultural exchanges where beings learned that their differences made them stronger together. On Earth, children learned about the war in school, but the lessons were not about weapons or tactics. They learned about the day when humanity proved that any problem could be solved if enough people were willing to think creatively about solutions. The final ceremony of the anniversary celebration took place at the exact coordinates where the first human ships had arrived to help the coalition. Representatives from every member species gathered in their vessels, forming a massive fleet not for war but for remembrance. Fleet Admiral Youngman broadcast the closing message to every ship and every world in the Alliance. "We began this journey because we were called as a last resort," he said. "We were the species nobody expected to succeed. But we learned something important together. There are no last resorts. There are only new ways of thinking about old problems. He paused, looking out at the incredible diversity of ships and beings that had come together. We did not just rewrite the rules of war. We proved that rules are just suggestions. Limitations exist only when we choose to accept them. The universe is not a place of fixed laws, but infinite possibilities waiting for someone creative enough to discover them. As the transmission ended, something beautiful happened. Every ship in the fleet activated their engines at the same time, not to fly away but to create a light show that could be seen from nearby planets. The display was chaotic and unplanned, with each vessel contributing whatever they could. It was perfectly human in its imperfect beauty. A celebration of the idea that amazing things happen when different beings work together, without worrying about following the same rules. The war was over. The galaxy was free. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, new problems were already developing that would require creative solutions from beings who had learned to think the impossible into reality. The universe would never run out of challenges, but it would also never run out of dreamers willing to turn those challenges into opportunities for something better.